Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how you doing? It's Thursday once again, and you are listening to the next era in pro wrestling analysis. Welcome back to WWEC Radio. I am here, Tommy Sharp, standing in the WWEC Radio studios, and on the line we have the master of analysis, Graham GSF Matthews. How are you doing? It is good to catch up with you, sir. What's going on?
Tommy Sharp, how you doing for the first time in almost a month? Over a month. It's been a long time coming, but great to be back here on WWEC Radio. First time coming face-to-face in the show. We usually only have audio. We got video here today for a special occasion, talking NXT TakeOver the End. Can't wait for it.
Absolutely. We are just 1 day removed, not even 24 hours removed from NXT TakeOver the End of the beginning. And it was an exceptional show front to back. There is so many things to talk about, so many facets, from the matches themselves to the production value that we saw last night. Where do you want to start? Where do you want to dive into some of the matches? Because I am just dying to talk about Tye Dillinger.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess we'll start with the opener here, but I guess even before we get to the beginning match, let's talk about the end of the beginning. We were talking about it a little bit before we went on the air here. The end was what NXT was calling the special NXT TakeOver the End, but they just threw it on there at the last second. NXT TakeOver the End of the beginning, showing that little video package, the evolution of NXT from 4 years ago, from Paige and Seth Rollins to Big E to now guys like Balor and Joe and Asuka and Bayley, all these other up and rising athletes in NXT. And it really, the name itself didn't bother me, but Tom, you made a great point about it. I want to hear you talk about it again, illustrate your point about NXT TakeOver the End, why it didn't really make much sense.
Yeah, so it all kind of started building with this whole idea that this was going to be the end. And certainly if you were a fan day to day with the WWE, you couldn't not avoid the news that the new era is upon us. So given that, the end, there's a lot of connections there. And with the upcoming draft, I had assumed many things or could be inferred from the end, but it started making more sense. There was a lot of different takes online about what that could mean, and there's still a lot of different takes online about what that could mean. But for me, this past week, Triple H sent out a tweet saying on August 20th, I believe, is going to be the next NXT TakeOver. So given that news, this couldn't possibly be the end of the name TakeOver, which I had possibly assumed they were going to go to a semi-annual schedule of set named NXT events. And, certainly NXT has made their mark this year on pro wrestling culture in general. So, they would certainly be deserving of their own titled types of shows. But it occurred to me that it was possible that the stockholders who might not be paying attention as closely to what's going on could have started selling their stock because they thought NXT was over or wrapping up or no longer being televised. And therefore, you have to kind of tack on this ... of the beginning, the end of the beginning. And just to kind of appease everybody and make it perfectly clear. And I think from a marketing standpoint, they may have dropped the ball a little bit in that area, confusing people. But I still thought it was a great, bold title. It said a lot. There's a lot of things to be inferred right now based on some of the outcomes and the finishes of these matches as to what might have actually ended and what might be beginning now. So we certainly saw a lot of that reflected in the tag title match, which we will get to, which it was an exceptionally fun match in a lot of ways. But yeah, that's basically what I think right now, is that this was a stockholder decision to really change the marketing pitch. Even if it was at the 0 hour, at least they saved face and kind of clarified that a little bit. Or perhaps this was something they were hanging on to just to bait people into wondering and building the mystique of this show. I could also see them adding that on for the fans to understand that this is just the end of this group of people that are going to be called up to the main roster potentially, and we'll see how the whole playing field shakes out in the next month or so.
Which wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, you look at the group of guys and girls that were on last night's show, Balor, Samoa Joe, Asuka, American Alpha, even all of these guys and girls could be called up as soon as the summer, with the brand split going into effect starting this July. Only next month, Raw and SmackDown having their own distinct, unique rosters again. I could very well see any of the guys on this show, even the Revival, or even Tye Dillinger, who knows, showing up on Raw or SmackDown. So I thought it was a unique title. Like you said, though, I mean, it's a lot like the in-your-house pay-per-views with TakeOver and having them every few months. And Brooklyn's coming up in August for the second straight year. Should be a great time. But, kind of an interesting way of kicking off the show. And I love the video package that opened the event with, like I said, the evolution of NXT, where they were 2-3 years ago, even 4 years ago, when they started out at Full Sail University to where they are now. It's just an amazing evolution, to say the least. Yeah,
it's very cool to see them continue the idea of a takeover where NXT is expanding. Even though this show was at Full Sail University, NXT in the last year has really done an incredible job. From Lowell, Massachusetts, and Finn Balor losing his title to Samoa Joe, which played a huge factor in a lot of the promotions for their match last night, to Brooklyn, to Texas. All of these places that they have traveled to, they have really taken over. And I don't think that we have totally seen the end of that takeover. So for me, I'm still pretty happy to see the takeover name being used, and I think it will spread even more familiar awareness of NXT in the different territories, if you will, that they're traveling to now. So exciting stuff to see everything continue forward and be completely shaken up after the events of last night. So why don't we dive right in? I know we don't totally or typically go match by match, so we can jump around a little bit. But I think one of the matches that I was the most looking forward to seeing was Tye Dillinger last night. And I was so psyched that he opened the show. And my God, did he deliver a perfect 10, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Tye Dillinger is the perfect 10. We've talked about it, at length, ad nauseum here in the show before. Our last episode before we went off the air for the summer, we were talking about how Tye Dillinger is so vastly underrated. The guy is great in the ring. He's got his character down pat. Finally releasing a new T-shirt for the guy in WWE Shop. I saw that yesterday. It's a cool-looking T-shirt. It's a perfect 10. It's a perfect 10.
It is perfect 10. I loved it right away.
It's a great shirt, and his opponent was no slouch either. We've talked about him before. His former name was Manny Andrade. It's Andrade Cien Almas. Great opponent in Almas. He had a great first showing. He's got an awesome look too. Very crisp, very smooth in the ring. We talked about him a couple months ago here in the show. At that little live event that RJ and I were at, we got our first glimpse of Almas. He was in action on that show against Austin Aries. Had an amazing showing and had a great showing on this show as well. Dillinger and Almas, both awesome athletes, having a very fun opening match to kick off the show.
Now, here's the thing for me. Upon seeing Cien, I was a little underwhelmed. I mean, or not a little underwhelmed, but a little apprehensive at first. He didn't come out with a huge, aura of pomp and circumstance behind him. He was a little bit more reserved in his walk down the entrance ramp. Obviously, being a new person, you don't have, a ton of immediate pop the second your face appears. And he came out in all white. And I was like, it's an interesting look. Kind of looks like somebody painting a house coming down to the ring. And then just as I was about to be critical of it, boom, the whole outfit changes. He snaps off the pants, and he has got a very distinct and color-wise an opposing kind of look to his character to go against Tye Dillinger. It was like red and blue. It was very well thought out, and I thought visually it already started telling a story of these two different competitors. One being a little bit more vibrant with the full pants and the bright white boots, it being Cien, and then you have Tye Dillinger in basically just red trunks and all of his attitude and just his explosive personality. So right off the bat, I thought this was different. This was exciting. This was not what I was expecting. And Cien looked poised to really be a good competitor against Dillinger. But when they started in the ring, it was exceptionally technical. It was very soft, subtle, mundane, just trying to feel each other out, but really kind of putting the moves over on one another. A lot of one-upsmanship throughout the entire match. And I think that is exactly the type of match that the Perfect 10 Tye Dillinger always goes out there to try and have. But now he's got this foil to his Perfect 10 balance. And I think Cien matches him like toe-to-toe at every step. And it's really interesting to see 100% versus the Perfect 10.
Definitely. I mean, there was a different dynamic from what we're used to at these TakeOver, quote-unquote, squash matches. It wasn't a squash match in the slightest. I mean, at past TakeOvers, and then the commentators alluded to it last night, Cien had a very high bar to me. I mean, a very high standard. We've had Apollo Crews. We've had Asuka. we've had Shinsuke Nakamura, we've had Austin Aries, all these people having in common that they all made their in-ring debut at past takeovers. And other than Nakamura, most of those guys had squash matches. They dominated their opponents. Baron Corbin, no different as well. Kevin Owens, same thing. This was the farthest thing from a squash match. Very competitive contest with both guys coming out of this. Not one, not the other, but both of them coming out of this looking like stars. Dillinger deserves so much more in NXT. Like I said, it's kind of beating a dead horse. We've said it before, but with all the potential call-ups with Balor and Joe and all the other top-tier stars, we could see Dillinger positioned at a higher spot in the company before long. And Cien, too, is an awesome athlete. Like I said, I think he has the sky is the limit for this guy in NXT.
I truly agree. The interesting thing about watching Dillinger in the ring last night was how much of a vocal presence he wanted to have with the entire audience and how the crowd ate it up at every turn. He was pulling off some impressive moves that I think only a competitor like Cien has really brought out of him at this point. So I think he pushed himself. Cien was pushing himself just to keep up with Tye Dillinger, and he can more than keep up with Tye Dillinger, which I'm excited to see where all this all goes. I feel like there's a real feud building in both of them right now. And I want to point this out because it bothered me a little bit, and this has everything to do with why I think Cien got the ultimate win over Tye Dillinger, and I want to get your thoughts on this. So Dillinger throws Cien off the ropes. Cien bounces back, tilt-a-whirl backbreaker. One of the best, flawless backbreakers I've seen in a while, especially from Tye Dillinger. Goes down for the cover. Cien kicks out in barely a 1 count. Now, I don't think that there was a single time that when Dillinger was on the ground, I believe Cien always got a 2 count every time. So the fact that backbreaker did really have no effect on Cien was really interesting to me. And I think that perhaps Cien being a slightly larger framed competitor than Dillinger, maybe he can absorb a little bit more of those hits. I don't know, but it did seem to me that he kicked out really quick, and that was an indication for me that Cien might be taking a win at the end of the match. And I thought that Dillinger owned that match. I thought he had Cien's number the entire time, and certainly his extra experience in NXT would certainly validate him walking away with a win after that one. But the fact that Dillinger couldn't come up with the win at the end of the day, I think that is what's going to piss him off the most and set him down a path of proving Cien wrong if Cien continues to get this kind of positive reaction from the crowd.
Hopefully. I would love to see this feud continue more than just a one-off. Cien and Dillinger, obviously, as both of us have said, have just great chemistry together. So hopefully this is only the beginning, not the end of the beginning, just the beginning of this great feud between these two in NXT. And like I said before, sky's the limit for Cien. He has so much potential. Dillinger too. And he went for his finisher towards the end there. I don't know what he calls it, but the reverse back knee has whatever the heck it's called.
Yeah, with the exposed knee.
Yes, exactly. He went for that last night, pulling down both of his knee pads, came close. Cien scored the victory with a very impressive finishing maneuver as well. And I look forward to seeing what both these guys can produce in the future of NXT going forward.
Yeah, that was interesting to see. The match really started off with a grappling moveset, and by the end, you saw a slightly desperate Dillinger. I think after, seeing Cien kick out of 1 counts and things like that, you can't necessarily, just win with a standard moveset here. So he was kind of pulling out all the stops, and it'll be really cool to see where that all heads. But heading into the match that followed that, I was equally surprised that we saw the tag match right after that for the NXT tag titles.
I was actually kind of happy about that. I like the lineup of the show just because ever since Arrival, we've had 11 TakeOver specials or NXT Live specials, whatever you want to call them, since February of 2014. And what they all have in common, with the exception of respect, obviously, that the women's match has always gone on second to last. Nakamura and Aries obviously was a big enough match where it had to go on before the women's match, and then the title main event. So kicking off with the debut of Cien, that was great. Then there was really nowhere else to go. Then but the tag team title match, which kicked off the show back in Dallas. So I like the lineup of the show. I like the formula which they went with here. It was very refreshing. But the match itself, I thought, was just exceptional. There really isn't any other way to put it. I think, in Dallas they had a great match too. And I want to get your thoughts on this. I've seen some mixed reviews. I would say this was better than the encounter they had in Dallas.
100%. I think every match this NXT in every way, from a psychology point of view to a writing perspective to the performance to the near flawlessness of every match and the execution and everything, there is just any of the mistakes I can easily forgive because everyone put in 110% into this show. If this was really the end for any of these people, they did themselves well. If they're moving up to the main roster, if they're doing something else within the company, whatever might be happening behind the scenes, everybody put on an A+ perfect 10 show last night. And from the Revival and American Alpha in this match, it was the tightest and most fiercely competitive tag match that either of those teams have had against each other to date. It was the Revival being undermining and cruel in the corners, a lot of corner work, which I was impressed with, and at Gable building up that hot tag for Jordan, just carrying the brunt of the beatdowns and really putting everything over, sliding under people's legs, being like completely wily about every advantage he could to get Jordan into the mix, clean house, and then Gable would come back in and really work them down and pare down their energy. And I really liked the balance that American Alpha showed last night, despite the fact that at the end of the day, they lost the titles again.
I think it can be summed up in only 3 words: tag team wrestling. You do not see this kind of wrestling in any other. And sometimes in Ring of Honor, but more often than not, you do not see this kind of tag team wrestling in any other promotion, whether it be WWE, TNA, name it. Probably not, but NXT, they've got some great tag teams down there. And we'll talk with the debuting team afterwards, which also made an immediate impact immediately following this contest. But the point being that American Alpha and the Revival are 2 of the very best in the business, not even NXT right now. American Alpha, just the business on the whole. In the business on the whole, these guys are just absolutely amazing. But the match itself, tag team wrestling at its finest.
And they really do things both in ring and on the mic in their promotions. And I don't know if you watched any of the NXT pre-show, so the Revival made an appearance, and I couldn't stop laughing. I thought it was one of the best promos I have seen all year, where I believe it was Dash who was just silently crying and occasionally putting water drops in his eyes to really drive home the fact that, he was really upset and sorry that it just didn't look like Jason Jordan was going to be able to hold on to the titles much longer. And it just killed me because it cements them. They will never not be the corrosive kind of bully mentality and like goon mentality that the Revival really has. And they want to hurt you emotionally. They want to get under your skin. They want to hurt you physically. They want to secretly attack you from behind, anything to get under your skin and gain any kind of competitive advantage. So going into that, you certainly saw American Alpha just fired up to the point where they made enough mistakes that they lost the titles.
Speaking of mistakes, Tom, it was you that made the point back in April when we were talking about TakeOver Dallas that it was that one mistake in that match from the Revival that cost them the championships. I don't remember exactly what it was. They were going for a clothesline on top of one, I think they could have been going for the Shatter Machine or setting it up, and yes, on the top rope.
And they did not connect with it, and it was a little bit sloppy.
And that's what cost them the titles.
And that's what cost them the titles. And I love that in NXT, the psychology is as such that if you slip up during your match, there's no such thing as a botch. This wasn't a botched move. This wasn't, something that didn't get pulled off to its fullest extent. It leads to your demise. You could lose the titles by missing a step. It's that competitive. And I thought that really shined through in the tag team match in general. It was high energy. It was one of the fastest tag team matches I've seen all year long. And,
go ahead.
No, and that is taking into consideration that the Revival do not play the speed game. They play off American Alpha quite well, but they're a lot more subdued. They're a lot more methodical and purposeful with the actions that they take, and they can get caught off guard with all of the speed from Jason Jordan and Gable, but at the end of the day, they can absorb just as much of it too and let the Energizer Bunnies wear themselves out.
And that's what the case was here. I mean, the Revival were absolutely flawless. I mean, like you alluded to yourself, It was that one mistake from the Revival back in Dallas that cost them the championships. They were flawless on this night, and look what happened. They became 2-time NXT Tag Team Champions, the first ever in history. No other team can say, not the Ascension, not the Lucha Dragons, not these guys, not the Vaudevillains, not American Alpha. No one can say they become 2-time NXT Tag Team Champions. So history was made last night. A great win for the Revival, and they have plenty of challengers coming up. They got Gargano and Ciampa. They got TM61 who just arrived. And this brand new team that we got a great new glimpse of right after this matchup.
Yeah, that was interesting. Now, we're definitely familiar with the manager that had come out. He is a former Legion of Doom manager. His name off the top of my head.
Ellering.
Ellering. There it is.
Ellering, yep.
He looks so much like the actor that plays Freddy Krueger that I always get them crossed up in my head. But he's a fantastic manager. The second I saw him, I wondered why he wasn't managing the Ascension from the get-go. But outside of that, I was not as impressed with the Koopa kids that came out. Dingus and Bingus with no necks and their black kind of yard work attire. They certainly made a statement. They beat up a completely beat up American Alpha, so I don't necessarily think that gives them too much credibility. I'm not sure what they're going to do in the ring or how they're going to look or how they're going to factor in to the tag team division going forward, but it is absolutely clear by the matching outfits, by their demeanor, by their manager, that they are going to be a part of this tag team division, like it or not.
This tag team revolution with American Alpha, Revival. Now these guys, I believe they were called by the commentators, and they've been called online the Authors of Pain, which is a pretty cool name. I know nothing about them individually other than they've been working NXT live events for a while now. Paul Ellering as their manager made me immediately intrigued as to what these guys are capable of. I mean, you look at them from a first glance, like you said, you've got Shield 2.0. I've seen 3-minute warning comparisons. I don't know what they're capable of in the ring. They could be even worse than the Ascension. Who knows? They could be boring as heck. But first night in, they captured my attention, and attacking the former tag team champions, American Alpha, gives them something to do for the immediate future. They have their rematch clause with Revival, that rubber match, which is going to be equally as amazing as the last two matches they had. And then you have these guys who are their new, they have their sights set on American Alpha and making, an impact, making a statement from the get-go.
Yeah, it was an interesting conclusion, and now I would want to say that this takes the focus away from American Alpha being able to go right back after the Revival. They're definitely pissed off and then upset that they lost their belts, but they also got an unceremonious beatdown. So I would expect to see some fallout from that, and I think that alludes to the fact that the Revival, American Alpha, and now this new tag team probably are here to stay in NXT for the next little while anyway.
NXT's tag team division, like I said, is looking stacked. I mean, with all these new teams coming up, we got American Alpha, Revival, this new team, the Authors of Pain, TM61, who arrived a couple weeks ago in a great match with Gargano and Ciampa. Obviously, you have the Hype Bros waiting in the wings as well. A lot of new teams. I'm sure there's other teams, coming up in the near future as well. The NXT Tag Team title picture is looking stacked, and hopefully American Alpha, a lot of people, leading to speculation, they lost the belts after only 2 months. Could we see them on Raw or SmackDown coming up in the draft sooner rather than later? Who knows? But that would be an exciting idea to entertain for the upcoming future.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So moving forward anyway, what was our next match of the night? Was that already moving into Nakamura?
Shinsuke and Nakamura and Austin Aries, you got it.
It was. The thing about Austin Aries coming out is that he now looks so dangerous, just coming out with this awesome cape, with this total attitude, coming into the ring to face Shinsuke Nakamura as the greatest man that ever lived. He really walked that walk last night. I have not seen so far in NXT anyone stack up and go toe-to-toe with Nakamura in the way that he did last night. And I really wanted to see him take away that win because I thought he earned it that whole match. Nakamura came out like he does with a blast of energy right at the end to really sweep that win away from Austin Aries. But there wasn't a time that Nakamura wasn't throttled by Austin Aries. So I'm curious to hear what you thought of that match.
I really enjoyed this match. I'm sure people might be, not many people, but I feel like some people might have been disappointed coming off the Classic with Zayn and Nakamura, arguably the best match of this year back in Dallas. But you can't even compare the two. They told two totally different stories.
Totally, yeah.
That was a complete masterpiece in and of itself. This match, going into it, had a real feud, had a real storyline. We were just looking forward to Zayn and Nakamura because we knew it was going to be a great match. This match, and this takeover overall has had, very little buzz. I'm excited for it. You're excited for it. Many people were just kind of like, it's takeover. It's going to be great, but there's not real much build or buzz behind it. This match, however, Austin Aries coming in, and it told a perfect story. And we've been talking about this for weeks. Austin Aries felt like when he came in, he was flying under the radar. He was being overshadowed by Nakamura. And he had to prove to himself and the WWE Universe officials and whoever else, and especially to Nakamura, that he was the greater of the two athletes. And he definitely had a strong showing here. Obviously, his best match in NXT to date. And that's not saying much. He's only faced not much competition, but still an awesome opponent, Nakamura, having a very strong showing here. The greatest man who ever lived was the most dangerous man who ever lived last night, and just looking like a star against Nakamura.
How about that preview package that they rolled before the match? I thought it built up the resentment coming off of Austin Aries quite well. Here's the greatest man that ever lived having to deal with the hype of Shinsuke Nakamura coming to town, and he's saying, what's the big deal here? I'm Austin Aries. I'm here to make statements and make moves in this company, and now I'm being overshadowed by this hype machine that everybody is just flocking to in droves. I don't think that set very well with him, and that's why I think we saw a little bit less of the show and kind of show off nature that Austin Aries can have, and I thought we saw a little bit more of a devastation coming from his moveset.
And that's where he shines. I mean, I saw him in TNA. He was in TNA for the past 4 or 5 years, arriving there almost 5 years ago to the day next month. The guy was a great heel. He's an awesome babyface. People love him. He's a fan favorite. But when he gets down to the nitty-gritty and he has something to prove, that is when he's at his best and is at his most dangerous. And he showed that last night. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that he's a full-fledged heel now. We'll find out in due time. This show provided a lot more questions and answers, which I love because it keeps you watching, it keeps you excited, and keeps you intrigued. Yeah. And this match was just a prime example of that. Nakamura scores another victory, but Austin Aries obviously gave him the best fight to date of anyone in NXT. And I would go so far as to say this feud is far from over between these two.
Especially with the glimpse of Bobby Roode that we got last night. I wonder if any of that will play into the retaliation that Austin Aries has planned. What do you think?
I would look forward to that. I mean, we were, playing around the idea about a month ago, right after I left campus, about Roode coming in as Austin Aries' tag team partner. That match against Blake and Murphy, obviously, instead it was Shinsuke Nakamura, which led to this match. But they have history. I mean, the guys have histories. Both of them have history as opponents, and especially as tag team partners, as the Dirty Heels, having a great tag team run over in TNA. I'd be excited with Roode on his own, with Austin Aries. I thought there was a chance he could come in here and help Aries score the victory. Obviously not the case. But I'm excited for Roode and whatever he pursues in NXT. The guy is just a star-studded talent. Cannot say enough good things about him. I think he's going to make a huge impact whenever he arrives in NXT. It could be as soon as tonight at the set of tapings at Full Sail.
Now, here's two things that I have for you just before we move on to the main event picture of the night. I thought it was amazing, and NXT does an exceptional job of creating clean victories. There was not any outside interference, for the most part, of any kind last night. I mean, American Alpha aside. And that didn't really interfere with the match in any kind of way. Mm-hmm. The clean finishes all over the place, establishing new power rankings, new feuds. It really goes a long way to not focus so much on the wins and losses, but focus on the motivation of a loss. Why does a loss motivate you even more than a win does necessarily? And being on top sometimes is the loneliest place to be in general. But when I saw Austin Aries come out with his ribs all taped up, right? There was even the announcers were a little bit caught off by all this, and they were speculating as to why he looked a little bit beat up, right? At one point, I really thought we were going to see maybe a foreign object of some type, maybe some brass knuckles, maybe taking a page out of William Regal's book. I thought we might see that as the victory over Shinsuke Nakamura, and it didn't happen, and I'm totally fine with that. It was just a straight up competitive match, but it'd be interesting to see some more of that foreign object play. But for right now, it is just clean victories and flawless execution in the storytelling. The psychology is just on display in this last NXT TakeOver the end. I thought it was exceptional. And that leads right into the exceptional match that Asuka had against Nia Jax. Total shocker for me. Total shocker. I was in Asuka's corner. I was wearing my Asuka shirt, Empress of Tomorrow. I am one of the biggest Asuka marks that I know of. And I just think she's fantastic in the ring, even on the mic, the lead up from last NXT to this match that we had last night. She could get on the mic and say very little and still be more fierce and intimidating than anything. And Nia Jax should have heeded her words from NXT last week when she says, if you're not afraid, you should be. And Nia Jax should have been a little bit more afraid because as powerful as she was, she could not get the job done. What were your thoughts?
Like you said, Asuka's actions speak louder than her words. That was evident last week in the contract signing. Nia Jax came in looking like a beast coming into this contest, losing nothing in defeat whatsoever. Nia Jax, I've never been her biggest fan, but undoubtedly having her best showing to date last night at TakeOver. Even better than her match at in London against Bayley, which I didn't think was told the right story. It was an all right match. I thought this match was significantly better. Asuka is amazing. That goes without saying. She definitely carried her into a very good match. Nia Jax held her own here. She looked like a monster throughout, which is how she should be portrayed. She physically looks like an imposing force in NXT, and that's exactly how she's been handled for the most part by and large. The ending I thought was awesome. She comes up short, but not before unleashing this fury on Asuka, just yelling and screaming before Asuka ultimately took her out. It was a great visual. Asuka scoring the victory, still the champion, but a lot like with Balor and Joe from a few months ago, also in London, Balor saying he won the title, or he retained the title, but barely survived. That was the case here with Asuka and Nia Jax, and Asuka made that very clear afterwards on WWE's YouTube channel. They interviewed her, and she was saying, is Nia Jax, the interviewer was asking her, was Nia Jax her biggest challenge to date? And she said, without a doubt. And I would not be surprised if that was not the last time we would see them go face-to-face in the ring.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there's something building there, especially on Nia's part. Since this loss did not sit well with her. She came in probably way too overconfident that she was just going to be able to squash because she injured Bayley. And let's not forget that this match originally was supposed to be Bayley versus Asuka too. Which would have been an entirely different pace. The interesting thing that I did notice last night was that Nia Jax is an entirely different type of skill set, an entirely different type of competitor than Asuka. So Asuka's normal speed, her quickness, the ability to bounce off the ropes, bounce off her opponent, and strike back quickly was taken away from her. Asuka almost had to figure out how she could focus on certain areas of Nia Jax to be able to bring her down to her level to get that win. And it was interesting. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the speed of that match because we had seen, a very intense opening to the show. We had seen a very fast, one of the fastest tag team matches I've seen all year, like I said, leading into a very hyped up Austin Aries and Shinsuke Nakamura match. And then this match definitely slowed it down a little bit. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that was part of the match. So what were your thoughts about the speed?
I would say in a good way. Like you said, I feel like it was different from every other match of the night, which I feel like is something you have to do. If every match is fast-paced and they all kind of bleed together, not one match stands out, over the other. It was a slower match, sure, and as well as their match with Bayley, Nia Jax, that is back in London. But again, it's hard to compare the two because that match was a lot slower and I just could not get myself invested in the action. The reliance on the leg drops, and she hit Bayley with like 4 or 5 leg drops back in London, and Bayley kept on going for the chokehold, the guillotine chokehold. This matchup told a totally different story though, and it was slowed down, but in a way where I was excited, I was invested. And there was a shot. People are thinking, Asuka, Bayley 2 will happen in Brooklyn, undoubtedly. So when Nia Jax, without a doubt, loses here, there was a part of me that was thinking Nia Jax could walk away with the victory. She was pretty dominant heading into the show, knocking out Bayley. She didn't just beat Bayley. She broke her, like, Asuka said, or rather Nia Jax said a few weeks ago. She won the #1 contenders triple threat match against 2 of NXT's best, and Alexa Bliss and Carmella, and then knocking off Asuka last week in NXT. So, she's really had a pretty dominant 3 weeks. Last night, it culminated in the title match, coming close to the victory, but ultimately coming up short. Still, like I said, losing nothing in defeat. And they were asking her afterwards. She ignored the interviewer. Are your title aspirations over? She didn't answer, but I'm sure they're not. I mean, obviously she's a work in progress still. She could be champion down the line, but having a great showing here, and I gained an all-new respect for Nia Jax coming out of this matchup.
Yeah, I think you really hit on the fact there that this has been building, and I was completely led to believe that Asuka was going to have her lunch in to her and Nia Jax was going to be the new champion. I was shocked. I mean, I jumped out of my chair when I saw that 1, 2, 3 go down.
Yeah.
I really did. I was not expecting Asuka to come away with that win. You know, I was bummed out a little bit, but I can't wait to go back and rewatch that match. I really want to savor more of the pace of that match instead of kind of be anxious about the anticipation of the finish. And I think this is a very different thing. And, you know, be able to go back to the network and watch that again, I think is going to be even better on a second viewing. The subtle things that they told in that ring against those two competitors, a true, you know, a true matchup, two completely different styles and sizes. It is something to go back and analyze a little bit more, and I think we'll talk about it a little more on a future date, because I'm sure that Asuka, in Bayley's absence, does not have the competition around her yet to have somebody take that belt away.
Not just yet. I mean, like I said, we got Alexa Bliss, we got Carmella, we've got Peyton Royce, and a few others as well. Triple H alluded to in the post-TakeOver Facebook Live video or whatever that he did after the show last night, that even more women could be coming in the near future. So Asuka could, you know, she's had tremendous challenges in Dana Brooke, in Emma, in Bayley, and now Nia Jax, overcoming them all, still undefeated in NXT, but how much longer could it be before she faces her next big challenge? In Brooklyn, it could be Bayley. Bayley could be called up tomorrow for all we know. Who knows? So the future, the landscape of NXT's women division is certainly looking up, to say the least.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, just if that match wasn't enough for that show, and that certainly could have ended the show right there, and that would have been a stellar production, you know, front to back. But we had a cage match. We had a Demon and Samoa Joe trapped in a cage last night, but not exactly trapped in a cage, and I'll get to some of my thoughts about that. So before I dive into some of my critical thoughts, not necessarily about the match, but about a couple of other things, I thought that the two personalities clashed in the most intense and meaningful kind of ways last night. And I dare say, and this is just my early bold prediction here, that now that the Demon has been defeated, and we haven't seen the Demon Finn Balor get defeated yet. We've seen Finn Balor get defeated. But the Demon was finally conquered last night by Samoa Joe. That is not only a feather in Joe's cap and a real evolution of his power, but this could potentially lead to a scenario where Finn Balor is called up, does join the club, and the background story to all of that, when people ask, is that the Demon is not present in him anymore. You know, he's just now Finn Balor, a competitor. Because I really feel that the Demon is more of a babyface than Finn Balor ever will be. And, you know, it is just such an ominous presence and a powerful presence, and clearly the entire crowd gets behind that character that he becomes in that Demon. So if that Demon goes away and you're just left with Finn Balor the man, the Finn Balor the man is going to do whatever it takes to continue climbing to the top, and the club is certainly making every single step to become the most dominant team in the WWE right now. So what were your thoughts about that match and everything that Finn Balor and Joe brought into the ring?
Well, even before the match itself, you make a great point. I'm really hoping they have that consistency between NXT and the main roster. That I would hope that before it gets to the main roster, which I think is the next logical step, we'll talk about that at the end, what's next for both of these guys. I would love to see the Demon get conquered. I have no idea, now that you mentioned that, how that was not the main title on WWE.com last night. Samoa Joe conquers his demons at NXT TakeOver. That just writes itself right there. You should be working for the website.
Right.
But the match itself, I thought the match itself was really, really good. I mean, it's not too much of a stretch to say, but one of, if not the best steel cage match I've seen in a long time. Just because, and you alluded to it earlier, we get so much interference in these steel cage matches. And again, not only WWE, not to bash the main roster, it's in pretty much every single company, that the steel cage matches, they do not prevent interference. And most times in wrestling, they invite interference. And now we finally have a scenario where, they try to escape the cage, and you're going to talk about that soon enough as well, in the fact that it didn't really keep them in and Balor tried to leave. But other than that, there wasn't any interference from Bobby Roode. I saw some people thinking Hideo Itami was going to come in. I'm like, oh, maybe, but straight up one-on-one affair, really good match. And I got to say this too. The feud itself has been awesome. Maybe I'm the minority here, but, this feud has been going on for 8 months. I think these guys really captured something magical here. That how often can you have a feud that goes on for 8 months, pretty much as long as we've been friends, since October these guys have been feuding for. And they've been feuding for that long, and it still feels fresh. I was still excited for this matchup, and it really blew off the match in a major way. Samoa Joe has beaten Finn Balor, but never the Demon, like you said, Tommy, and I loved it. I thought it was a really, really good match with a fantastic finish as well, the muscle buster off the top. It was a great visual.
Yeah, to see the build-up of this match, to know that these two competitors have been healthy for the entirety of their feud for almost 8 months, going from friends winning the Dusty Rhodes Invitational, Tag Team Invitational, to the complete fallout, and everything that has been drug out of them in the last couple of weeks, from interviews to backstage shoots to in-ring jabbing back and forth. I think this was the culmination, truly the end of that chapter for the two top male competitors in NXT right now. And I think you saw that in the ring work. I think, and I'll get to some of the just general how WWE approaches some of these cage matches, but even the fact that they weren't running for the door, just to walk out the door and win. They really wanted to hurt each other. The cage had very little to do with a stipulation of here is two competitors forced to really, compete in a claustrophobic setting here, and you got to get outside just to win. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that you could beat the other person so senselessly that you could win in any way that you wanted. And the cage was just your extra instrument of torture, if you will, against your opponent. And I was surprised they didn't do a ton of cage interaction, not a lot of cage spots here, but it certainly contained the beast. And maybe that was part of the downfall, is that he couldn't, use the outside, ring area to slide and run and get a different kind of perspective advantage over Joe, who certainly is a little bit more of a slower competitor. I mean, the analogy between Asuka and Nia Jax certainly applies between Finn and Samoa Joe. A fast, lean competitor versus, kind of a hulking, menace of a character in Samoa Joe. So you have these two different styles, and it wasn't like Joe could just easily squash the Demon. Finn Balor had a total upper hand, leading all the way to those final moments where he was sitting on top of the cage. And I thought we were going to see a really high spot from the Demon off the top of the cage, maybe even a coup de grace from the very top of that cage, which wasn't all that tall. The cage wasn't as tall as your normal WWE main roster cages, as it were. I feel like when Finn stood up on the top rope, his head was sticking out, over the top of the cage, which is fine. I thought it was that was a cool height for that anyway. But muscle buster off the top rope, not off the top of the cage or anything like that. Devastating. It looked like he really, nailed Finn pretty good, to the point where, not only did Nia Jax look like she got her bell rung at the end of that match, but it definitely looked like Finn took a pretty hard shades of, maybe Tyson Kidd's injury flashed through my head, but he landed clean, he landed flat. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt like hell, but I certainly was checking the internet to see if there was actual injury, and maybe that's naive of me. Maybe I'm a little bit too much of a mark and buying into stuff a little bit much there, but it did look really devastating, and I can't argue with that finish. I thought the finish made sense. It was very solid, and it was and it was a very competitive match, and it was a lot of fun.
Now there's no question. Samoa Joe is a superior athlete. He could beat Balor, and now he proved he could beat the Demon as well. I mean, now the score is 2-2, but I don't want to sit in their match. Samoa Joe finally beat him when it mattered most at the TakeOver special, handing him his first ever loss at a TakeOver show. But like you said before, though, I mean, clean victories up and down the card. This match was no different. But it's not just a clean victory. It's the little things that cost people the matches, like with the Revival just being flawless. Austin Aries jumping outside the ring with his bruised ribs, landing on the barricade. That cost him the victory. Balor here, like you said, they're not trying to escape. Balor wanted to inflict Joe, with as much punishment as possible. So he went to the top of the cage looking for that coup de grace off the top of the steel cage when he could have easily just escaped. If he really was that obsessed with the NXT Championship as he claims to be, he would have just left. But what was more important was beating Samoa Joe and proving that he could actually beat him, and he couldn't. He slipped up. That cost him the contest. Samoa Joe, still the NXT champion. No one came out to confront Joe, and I was totally fine with that. Makes you want to watch next week's show to find out who is next to attempt to unseat Samoa Joe as NXT champion.
That's perfectly said. That is exactly how I felt watching that entire match. And like you said, it was definitely one of the best cage matches as far as the in-ring work goes. Now, we have talked extremely positively about this whole show, and I want to keep it that way. So this next little brief aside is more of just an observation of how they approach that. And I know that much like the NXT superstars themselves, the crew that works at Full Sail, that works with the WWE to film all of this, they're also kind of a developmental crew. These are the people that they're trained to send out onto the road to do more live events, to be part of the main roster shows. So, that's at least my take on how that whole process works, at Full Sail. The thing that I noticed about cage matches, and this cage in particular, while very cool looking and how it came down from the top and assembles, in a very mechanized kind of way, there was at least a good half a foot pillar every 5 feet in that ring, and it really presented some obstructed views for all the camera work. Then you added the Kevin Dunn effect, where everything has to be moving, and I felt like I was watching WCW's World War III. It was nauseating at some times. They could not. They did not go to a static camera shot all but once. They did one establishing shot in that entire match, where you got a visual break and could actually see the competition, the competitors, for like all of 5 seconds, and then they cut away from it. And I was just like, this isn't a nostalgic comment because I grew up with this, but the old cage, the late 80s, early 90s cage, the blue and then the black cage, that had the large bars of, in between the cage, almost like steel pipes that made up this like cage that had some pretty big gaps in it. That cage, to me, not only from a story perspective, was more devastating because the weight of the metal is that much thicker, that much harder. If you smash your head on that, that's so much less pliable than a mesh kind of cage that gives when you're thrown into it. Maybe all that extra steel cuts you up a little bit more, but that's not like running into a pole that hits your head or anything like that. But the real reason I miss that cage is because, lo and behold, a camera lens fits pretty well in between almost 1 foot gap in a cage. So to have absolutely no thoughtful planning, no reluctance apparently to either use an overhead camera or put remote cameras in the 4 corners up the top of the cage, and never cut to a static shot, I think that it's just my criticism of their filming style in general. We've talked about this on a couple of different occasions, but this shaky cam action style camera where I can't stay on the same spot for more than just a second. When you have a grate in front of you, it's obnoxious to do that for an entire match. It takes away from the story they're telling in the ring because you can't see it. There were so many spots in that match where, oops, camera guy just missed it, couldn't get around that pillar, and I get that they don't do this the first cage match. It's the first time this crew has probably filmed a cage match. They have no idea what to expect, and they're still, approaching it the same way. And much like the competitors, you can't approach a cage match the same way you would approach any other match. And I think that that was the only moment last night where I felt like the production crew dropped the ball. Where I will give them tons of credit all night long, the spotlighting, the mood lighting, the brightness of everybody's entrances, the absolute storytelling that they told through their production all night long leading up to that cage match was A+. And I think that just that one element for that cage match, I wish it was captured a little bit differently. And I get that, if you watch TNA, if you watch, Ring of Honor, they have a lot more stationary camera shots. And it does kind of make it look more like a sport. when you have some static shots of some things, you know, and I think that it is WWE's reluctance to ever think or consider themselves in that same way as, you know, pro wrestling is sports entertainment. So it's definitely trying to be more action, you know, movie camera focused, and to their you know, discredit, I think a little bit on that capture. It didn't service them as well as it could have if they had a couple more establishing shots, but that's really being picky about, you know, those types of things. But I did notice it, and I hope that, you know, they take a look back at that footage and realize a couple of the things that they could do, or borrow from, say, Lucha Underground, who is expert at getting that top-down camera angle shot for a lot of their matches. And I think, you know, I hope they try to employ some of that. At least use NXT as your test ground to see if those ideas could work on the main roster level.
They should. I mean, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
So, I mean, outside of that, I honestly give this entire, you know, NXT TakeOver the end. I give it a solid A. I mean, it was just stunning. I think if a couple of other people like Bayley had been healthy, you know, we would have seen, you know, just an A+ show, an A+ effort from every single competitor. You know, they deserve a heaping amount of credit for every single thing that they pulled off last night. And what is to come could not be more exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, NXT itself, I mean, it's just amazing to me because the brand itself is so hot right now, and it has been since its inception years ago. But if you think about it like this, we've had 11 specials, not one, not two, and they've all been great. It's not like, oh, we've had 3 shows that are all great. That's not really saying much because we've only had 3. We've had 11 of these specials in the past 2.5 years. Every single one is at least a 7 or above. All of them have been good to great to amazing to near perfect, with Dallas and London and Brooklyn, this show too. I think exactly a perfect 10. It might go down this show. I don't know if it was a perfect 10, but it came pretty damn close. And I saw many people saying last night, one of my favorite shows all year. Honestly, RJ and I were at Extreme Rules. I would argue this was even better than that show. Because I think top to bottom, not a bad match in the show. I was never bored. And even more so than that, which is even more important, they got to keep you engaged and keep you looking forward to the future. They did that too. I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming up next. Bobby Roode, as you mentioned earlier, made an appearance backstage, kind of walking right past William Regal. What does that mean? Do we see him tonight at the tapings at Full Sail? I'm sure something about that might come out. Does Eric Young resurface? There's a lot of potential talent. I saw Moose might be coming in at some point once his Ring of Honor deal expires.
Saw that too. Yeah.
There's a lot of treatment.
Yeah, Graham, absolutely exciting. As exciting as getting back to the WWEC Radio studios here. This has been an exceptional opportunity for us. We couldn't resist. We couldn't hold back. We had to get together and discuss this because we would be doing it anyway. So we might as well capture it and share it. So everybody out there, we appreciate every bit of your support. Go and check out nextarrowwrestling.net. Stay tuned for more WWEC Radio as we move through the summer. We have a lot of things coming up. I'm sure we won't be able to resist jumping into some SummerSlam discussions at some point. And, we'll be monitoring everything. So you monitor nextarrowwrestling.net, and we will monitor everything that you need to know. Graham, a pleasure as always. We will talk soon.
Sounds good, Tommy. I'll catch you down the road.
Live long and love wrestling. Peace.
Peace.